Why did the laughter start the moment she stepped inside? It wasn't loud at first, just a breath of amusement, a few glances exchanged. That subtle look people give when they've already decided who you are. Emily felt it the second the door closed behind her. The smell of oil and cold steel filled her lungs. Boots scuffed the floor. Conversation slowed. And then someone smirked. She looked wrong to them. That was the crime. A wrinkled windbreaker, old sneakers, a canvas backpack that had seen real miles, not fashion miles. She didn't carry herself like the men in tactical pants or the collectors with polished watches. She stood quietly, observing, waiting. "Yoga class run late," someone said. A laugh followed. Emily didn't react. She kept her eyes on the wall of rifles, letting the noise pass over her like weather. She had learned long ago that reacting too soon only feeds the storm. Inside, something familiar tightened. Ignored, misjudged, again. She stepped closer to the counter. The receptionist's smile sharpened into something rehearsed and cruel, the kind of smile that existed only to remind people where they ranked. "You know where you are, sweetheart," the woman said. "This isn't a coffee shop." A few men chuckled. One lifted a shotgun as if it were a toy. "You even know how to hold one of these." Emily breathed in slowly. There had been rooms far colder than this. Rooms where silence meant survival. Rooms where one wrong breath cost lives. This was nothing. "I'm here to choose a weapon," she said. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. That confused them. The laughter hesitated, just for a second, long enough for uncertainty to creep in. Then it surged back louder, meaner. People always get cruel when they feel their control slipping. "Choose a weapon," someone echoed. "That's cute." Emily adjusted the strap of her backpack. Her fingers tightened briefly, then relaxed. She didn't tell them that she had been trained to wait out ridicule, that the program taught patience before precision. That silence wasn't weakness, it was a weapon. She looked at the clerk behind the counter. "FN Ballista," she said. "Phantom sight configuration, Loyola Magnum rounds." The room didn't just quiet. It froze. No one spoke. No one laughed. Even the man holding the shotgun lowered it slightly, as if gravity had suddenly increased. Someone muttered, "That configuration hasn't been public in 6 years." Emily didn't respond. Because she knew. And because this moment, the moment when doubt first crept in, was always the beginning. But they weren't ready to let go yet. "Internet trivia," someone scoffed. "Anyone can memorize specs." Emily nodded once, accepting the dismissal without argument. Inside, though, an old ache surfaced. Not anger, something heavier. Being unseen hurts more than being insulted. She had learned that as a child, sitting at long dinner tables where power spoke loudly and she chose not to. Her father had once told her, "Real authority doesn't announce itself. It arrives, and everyone feels it." She repeated those words now, silently, as the room circled her with doubt. But there was something she hadn't told them. Not yet. Why did the silence bother them more than defiance ever could? The manager came out from the back, clipboard in hand, eyes sharp. He assessed Emily the way men like him always did, calculating cost, liability, relevance. "Self-defense pistol," he asked, "something light." Emily shook her head. "The ballista," she repeated. "I've used it in sub-zero, northern border, whiteout conditions." Someone laughed too quickly. "Sure you did." A former cop pushed forward, badge still clipped to his belt like proof of relevance. "You don't look like someone who's seen real cold," he said. "You wouldn't last 5 minutes." Emily met his eyes. "You ever test recoil compensation at -30? She asked quietly. That stopped him. Not because of the words, but because of the certainty behind them. Whispers spread, uneasy now curious. They wanted her to be lying, needed it, because the alternative meant rethinking everything they believed about strength. Prove it, someone snapped. Emily considered that. The instinct to prove yourself is a trap. The program had drilled that lesson into her bones. But sometimes, silence needed punctuation. A heavy sniper rifle was thrust toward her, a challenge disguised as mockery. She took it one-handed. No strain, no show. She checked the scope, adjusted the suppressor. Her fingers moved with memory, not effort, like returning to a language you never forget. Wind drift, she said softly. Triple-sight systems compensate differently indoors. Someone scoffed, but it sounded hollow. The range door opened, targets aligned, thick military-grade glass layered between shooter and mark. One shot, the owner said. Don't embarrass yourself. Emily didn't respond. She settled into position. Breath, stillness, squeeze. The shot cracked through the air, clean, controlled. The bullet passed through all 4 layers of glass and struck dead center. No one spoke. A scarred man in the corner whispered, "She didn't even aim like we do." Emily lowered the rifle. Her hand brushed her backpack. Inside was a photo she rarely looked at, a past life, a version of herself before she disappeared into training facilities and nameless missions. She didn't smile, because this wasn't victory. It was recognition, and recognition always came with cost. Someone noticed the faded tattoo on her wrist, a symbol erased from records. The room shifted. What program was that? Someone whispered. Emily placed a single round on the counter and spun it. Ghost, she said. That word landed heavy. Because rumors were easier than truth, and truth was standing right in front of them, wearing old sneakers. But even then, disbelief clung like smoke. Because accepting her meant admitting they were wrong. And people would rather cling to lies than surrender pride. Outside, rotor blades began to cut the air. And Emily felt it. The pull back into a world she had hoped foolishly she was done with. What happens when the past refuses to stay buried? The helicopter's sound grew louder, vibrating the windows. Conversations died mid-sentence. Faces turned pale. A man in a dark suit entered. No announcement. No badge flashed. He walked straight to Emily and handed her a sealed envelope. She recognized the seal before she read it. Urgent recall. Mission class elevated. Signed at the highest level. The room understood then. Not fully, never fully. But enough. Who are you? Someone asked. Emily walked toward the door. I was just here to buy old rounds, she said. Seems peace still isn't mine. No one stopped her. No one laughed. In the days that followed, consequences arrived quietly. Jobs lost, reputations erased. Not revenge, just gravity reclaiming balance. Emily didn't watch. She never did. As the helicopter lifted, she closed her eyes. Let the rhythm steady her. It hurts to be unseen. But dignity doesn't beg. It waits. And when the moment comes, it acts. Sometimes strength doesn't speak at all. It simply endures. Why did her hands start shaking only after the helicopter doors closed? The noise faded into a steady thrum, blades carving the air into something almost soothing. Emily leaned back against the cold interior wall, helmet resting beside her, fingers pressed together as if holding something fragile. Only now, only when no one was watching, did the tension surface. A faint tremor, barely visible, but it was there. She hated that part. Not the danger, not the missions. The waiting. The envelope lay unopened on her lap, heavy, not because of paper but because of what it represented. A door she had tried to close, a life she had convinced herself she could leave behind. Outside the small window, the city shrank into grids of light. Ordinary lives, ordinary nights, people eating dinner, arguing over small things, believing tomorrow was promised. Emily envied that, more than she ever admitted. She remembered the first time she tried to walk away, told herself she was done being invisible, done being erased. She lasted 6 months before the nightmares returned. Snow, wind, radio silence stretching too long, the weight of a rifle pressed into frozen ground while time itself seemed to stop. You don't leave the work, she had learned. The work leaves marks on you. Across from her, the man who'd handed her the envelope sat quietly, hands folded. He hadn't said a word since they boarded. He never did. That was part of the agreement. Personal attachments blurred lines. Lines got people killed. But his presence stirred something she tried to bury. Normality. She tore open the envelope. Coordinates, timestamps, a name crossed out in black. And beneath it, a single line. Asset compromised. Silent retrieval required. Emily closed her eyes. Silent. That word always meant consequences. She thought of the gun store, the laughter, the way their confidence had crumbled when faced with truth they didn't expect. It would have been easy to feel vindicated, powerful. Instead, she felt tired. Because proving yourself over and over drains something essential, and no one ever talks about that part. Where? She asked finally. The man answered without emotion. Mountain corridor, border zone, same climate. Of course it was. Cold again. She nodded, didn't argue, didn't ask why she had been chosen. She already knew. Because she was disposable in the way only ghosts are. Because she could move without leaving ripples. Because if things went wrong, there would be no press conference. No apology. Just silence. As the helicopter veered north, Emily stared at her reflection in the dark window. She barely recognized the woman staring back, lines etched not by age but by restraint. Ignored, anxious, determined. All at once, she wondered, not for the first time, who she might have been if she'd been allowed to fail publicly, if she'd been allowed to be weak without consequence. But that version of her didn't exist. The training facility came into view before dawn. Concrete, frost, no insignia, the kind of place designed to disappear. Inside, familiar faces nodded without greeting. No hugs, no welcome back, just acknowledgement. You look thinner, someone muttered. Emily shrugged. You look alive. That was as close to affection as it got. Briefing screens flickered on, terrain maps, wind patterns, thermal anomalies. The compromised asset had been an operator once elite, now fractured. Intel suggested hesitation, doubt, a dangerous combination in the field. Why me? Emily asked, though she already knew the answer. You won't hesitate, the handler said. She flinched. Not visibly, but inside something recoiled. They mistook her discipline for certainty, her silence for absence of conflict. They were wrong. She had learned to act despite doubt, not without it. Night fell fast in the mountains. Snow swallowed sound. Emily moved alone, rifle strapped, breath controlled, each step deliberate, the cold nod testing her focus. She remembered the first mission, 20 years old, knees shaking, terrified she'd be exposed as unworthy. Back then, fear had sharpened her. Now it weighed heavier. Halfway up the ridge, she stopped. Something felt off. The wind shifted, too sudden, a signal flare of intuition she'd learned to trust. She adjusted her path, slower now, scanning. That was when she saw him. The asset. Huddled near a rock outcrop, weapon lowered, older than she remembered, beard grown wild, eyes hollow. He looked human. And that was the problem. Emily froze. Orders were clear, silent retrieval, no witnesses, no negotiation. But he turned, sensing her, and their eyes met. Recognition flashed. Emily, he whispered. Her name. She hadn't heard it spoken like that in years. You weren't supposed to find me, he said. They sent you because you'd understand. Her throat tightened. Understand what? The fear of becoming expendable, the weight of carrying choices no one else wanted. She felt something crack. Broken. Not enough to stop her hands, not enough to abandon discipline, but enough to hurt. "They'll erase me," he said, "just like they erased you." She almost laughed. "They never erased me," she said softly. "They just stopped looking." Snow fell between them, time stretched. He raised his weapon slightly, not to aim, but to show he still could. "I can't go back," he said. "I won't." Emily steadied her rifle. This was the moment they never trained you for, the moment when silence wasn't enough. Her finger rested on the trigger. Her mind screamed calculations. Her heart whispered something else. She exhaled and made a choice, one that would follow her longer than any mission. Because sometimes redemption doesn't come from obedience. Sometimes it comes from refusing to disappear. And that decision, made in the cold with no witnesses, would change everything that followed. Why did the radio stay silent when she broke protocol? The moment Emily lowered her rifle, she knew the rules had shifted. Not officially, not on paper, but inside her where consequences were always born before they arrived. Snow fell thicker now, softening the world into something almost merciful. The asset stood frozen across from her, breath coming out in shallow bursts, eyes fixed on her face as if trying to read a verdict. She hadn't fired. That alone was a message. "Move," she said quietly. "Not forward, not back. Just enough to put space between what they were and what they were about to become." He hesitated. Of course he did. Trust had been stripped from him piece by piece, just like it had been stripped from her. Still, he obeyed, stepping into the shadows of the rocks, lowering his profile. Years of training didn't vanish, they just slept. Emily tapped her earpiece. Nothing. No handler's voice. No reprimand, no confirmation. Silence. It should have alarmed her. Instead, it felt familiar. The kind of quiet that followed decisions you couldn't undo. She moved first, circling wide, using terrain the way she always had, not as cover but as conversation. The slope spoke to her through resistance. The wind warned her through pressure. She listened. They moved like this for hours, not as a team, not as enemies. Something in between. At dawn, they reached a hollow carved by ice and time. Emily finally allowed herself to sit. Her legs burned. Her shoulders ached. Fatigue crept in, not physical but emotional, the kind that seeps through armor. "Why didn't you take the shot?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "Because the truth wasn't clean." "Because I knew what came after," she said finally, "and I wasn't ready to live with it again." He nodded, understanding too well. They shared rations, old habits, no small talk, no apologies, just survival. Emily kept expecting the radio to crackle, orders to resume, to correct her mistake. But nothing came. That worried her more than any command. By the second night, she realized the truth they never said aloud. She had become the compromised asset. The realization didn't panic her, it saddened her. She thought of the gun store again, the way people assumed strength looked a certain way, how easily they dismissed quiet competence. That world felt distant now, fragile, built on illusions. Out here, truth was simpler. You either acted with integrity or you didn't. On the third day, the drone found them. She heard it before she saw it, a faint mechanical hum, out of rhythm with the mountain. Her body reacted before her thoughts. She shoved the asset down, covering him with her own weight as the drone passed overhead, sensors sweeping. It wasn't there for him. It was there for her. The message was clear. She rolled away, heart pounding. "I told you," he whispered, "they don't forgive hesitation." Emily stared up at the gray sky. "I know." She stood slowly. This was the fork in the road. The moment where survival and principle stopped aligning. If you run south, she said, there's a pass. No coverage, you'll vanish. He looked at her, disbelief and gratitude colliding. And you? I'll walk the long way, she said. Make noise. A bitter smile touched his lips. You always were like that. She didn't smile back. They separated without ceremony. No promises, no goodbyes, because those made things harder. Emily headed north. The radio crackled at last. Emily, the handler said, calm, disappointed, stand down. She didn't answer. The mountains closed around her, indifferent to moral dilemmas. Snow stung her face. Her breath fogged the air. She wasn't running. She was choosing. By nightfall, pursuit teams were active. She could feel them the way she felt storms before they arrived, pressure building, patterns tightening. She slowed deliberately, left traces, let them follow. Ignored. Anxious. Resolved. At a narrow ridge, she stopped and looked back. Not in regret. In acceptance. She keyed the radio once. This ends with me, she said. Then she cut the signal and stepped into the dark, carrying the weight of every silent decision she'd ever made, knowing the cost was finally coming due. Why did she stop running when escape was still possible? The ridge fell away beneath Emily's boots, a long spine of ice and stone cutting through the darkness. Wind howled across it, strong enough to steal breath, strong enough to erase footprints within minutes. She could have used that. Any other night she would have. Vanishing was something she had perfected long ago. But tonight she slowed. Not because she was tired, though every muscle screamed, but because something inside her had shifted. The choice she'd made back in the hollow wasn't a tactical deviation anymore. It was an identity fracture. Running now would only delay the reckoning. Below her, far off and scattered, faint lights moved. Headlamps, drones, teams advancing with discipline she recognized intimately. People trained the same way she was. People who believed they were doing the right thing. That knowledge hurt more than the cold. She found a shallow depression behind a jagged outcrop and crouched, forcing her breathing down. Slow, counted, controlled. Panic was a luxury she had never been allowed. Her radio remained silent. That worried her. In the old days, silence meant trust, autonomy granted because you'd earned it. Now it meant deliberation. They were deciding how to end this without leaving a mark. Emily checked her rifle. Ammunition was limited, enough to slow, not enough to win. She had known that from the start. She thought of the asset moving south, each step away from the life that had consumed them both. She hoped he'd make it, not because it would justify her choice. Nothing could do that, but because someone deserved to walk away whole. Her mind drifted, uninvited, to a memory she rarely touched. She was 17, standing in a quiet hallway while adults argued behind closed doors. Her father's voice, controlled but sharp. Men in suits speaking about potential and obligations. Her future mapped without her input. That night, her mother had found her packing a bag. You don't have to prove anything, she'd said gently. Emily had looked up, hands shaking, and replied, I already did, I just didn't know it yet. The lights below grew closer. She adjusted position, using elevation and shadow. She wasn't hiding from fear. She was buying time, for the asset, for herself, for something she hadn't named yet. A voice echoed faintly through a loudspeaker, distorted by wind. Emily Morgan, this is unnecessary. They had said her name. That landed heavier than any threat. She closed her eyes for a brief second. Let herself feel it, the ache of being known only when convenient. When she opened them, her resolve hardened. She fired a single shot into the snowbank ahead of the lead team, not to hit, to warn. They stopped. Good, they still remembered her. The radio crackled again, closer now. You don't have to do this, the handler said. Come in, we can fix it. Fix it. The word tasted bitter. Fix meant containment, silence, reassignment, another erasure wrapped in bureaucratic mercy. Emily pressed the transmit button. You taught me to see clearly, she said. This is what clarity looks like. She cut the channel. Movement erupted below. Teams fanned out. Drones repositioned. The choreography was flawless. So had hers once been. She moved again, drawing them higher, toward terrain she knew favored patience over force. Her boots slipped once, heart spiking, but she recovered. Mistakes happen when you rushed. Halfway across the ridge, a memory struck her so sharply she almost faltered. The gun store. The disbelief on their faces. The way power shifted when truth revealed itself. How fragile their certainty had been. Out here there were no spectators. No applause, just consequence. A flare burst in the distance, bathing the snow in harsh white. For a moment she was exposed, a lone figure against endless cold. She didn't hide. She stood. Let them see her. Because running forever was its own kind of prison. A shot rang out, close, too close. Stone chipped near her shoulder, not a warning. They were escalating. Her chest tightened, not fear, disappointment. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this. Emily dropped, rolled, and returned fire precise, restrained. She disabled a drone with one round, its lights spiraling as it crashed into the slope. Another shot took out a spotlight, plunging part of the ridge back into darkness. She wasn't trying to win. She was trying to end it on her terms. Between movements, fragments of thought surfaced, things she'd buried under discipline. How tired she was of being exceptional in silence. How lonely it felt to carry truth without witnesses. How strength, real strength, rarely looked heroic. Her breath came harder now. Blood seeped from a graze on her arm, warmth shocking against cold. Pain grounded her, reminded her she was still human. The teams advanced carefully. They knew her habits. She knew theirs. It was a grim symmetry. Another voice cut through the night, unfamiliar, younger. Emily, we don't want to hurt you. She almost laughed. She keyed the radio one last time. You already have, she said softly, just not the way you think. She moved toward the narrowest point of the ridge, where the drop fell away into shadow. The wind screamed here, furious and constant. One misstep meant oblivion. Behind her, boots crunched closer. This was the moment. Not the dramatic kind people imagined. No swelling music, no final speech. Just a choice. She thought of the asset again, of the chance she'd given him, of the life she might have had if she'd been allowed to be ordinary. Hope flickered small, stubborn. Emily turned, raised her hand slowly, rifle slipping from her grip and clattering onto stone. The teams froze. Snow whipped between them. She stood there, unarmed, bleeding, unbowed. I won't disappear again, she said, voice carrying despite the wind. Do what you came to do, but see me first. For a long moment, no one moved. The handler stepped forward, face pale beneath his hood. This will end you, he said. Emily met his gaze. I know. But there was something in her eyes then, not defiance, not fear. Relief. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding. And whatever came next, capture, erasure, or something worse, it would happen with her standing in the open. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't survival. It's refusing to be invisible. Why did the mountains feel quieter once she surrendered? The wind still howled, but the noise inside Emily faded the moment the restraints clicked around her wrists. Not tight, not cruel, procedural. That almost made it worse. She stood between two operators she recognized by posture alone, men she had trained beside, trusted once, maybe even saved. None of them met her eyes. That hurt more than the cold. They moved her carefully, respectfully, as if handling something fragile they didn't quite understand. No one spoke. Orders passed in hand signals, practiced and clean. The handler watched from a distance, his face drawn tight with calculation. She realized then that surrender hadn't simplified anything. It had complicated it. They escorted her to a temporary shelter carved into the mountainside, an emergency operations pod disguised as geology. Inside, heaters hummed softly. The contrast was jarring. Warmth rushed into her fingers, painful and unwelcome. Emily sat on a metal bench, hands still bound, blood drying on her sleeve. A medic knelt, hesitated, then wordlessly began cleaning the wound. Professional, detached, kind in the way systems allowed. Ignored again, but this time deliberately. She stared at the wall at nothing while the events replayed in her mind. The hollow, the asset's face, the drone overhead, the choice. She didn't regret it. That surprised her. The handler finally entered. He closed the door behind him, sealing them into a smaller silence. He removed his gloves slowly, as if buying time. "You made this harder than it needed to be," he said. Emily looked up. "You made it inevitable," she replied. He flinched just slightly. "You disobeyed a direct order." "Yes." "You compromised an operation." "Yes." "You endangered." "I saved someone," she said quietly. "That used to matter." The handler exhaled through his nose. "You don't get to decide that anymore." Emily tilted her head. "Then why am I still alive?" That landed. He turned away, packing once. "Because you're complicated." She almost smiled. That word again, the polite version of inconvenient. They left her alone after that. Hours passed, maybe more. Time lost meaning when no windows existed. She listened to the hum of equipment, the muffled voices beyond the wall. She felt the ache settle into her bones, not pain, but something deeper, emotional gravity. This was the cost she'd always known would come due. She thought of the gun store again, not as a victory but as a mirror. How quickly people judged. How stubbornly they clung to assumptions. The system was no different, it just wore better clothes. A memory surfaced uninvited. Her first evaluation after training. She executed every task flawlessly. The evaluator had looked at her file, then at her face and said, "You don't seem aggressive enough." She nodded, said nothing. Passed anyway. That had been the moment she understood. Excellence would never be enough. She would always have to be more than perfect and less than visible. The door opened again. This time 2 unfamiliar figures entered. Civilian attire, clean, controlled, power without uniform. One of them studied her with open curiosity. The other didn't look at her at all. "We need to assess your state of mind," the first said. Emily laughed softly. It surprised even her. "My state of mind," she repeated, after 15 years of sanctioned silence. The man frowned. "This isn't the time for humor." "It's not humor," she said. "It's clarity." They asked questions, careful ones, framed to sound compassionate while probing for weakness. Regret, instability. She answered honestly. That confused them. "No remorse?" one asked. "For what?" she replied. "Doing what I was trained to do, or realizing I no longer agree with why." They exchanged glances. This wasn't in the playbook. Eventually they left, again. Emily leaned back against the wall, exhaustion washing over her. Proud, broken, both at once. She didn't know how long she slept, but when she woke, the world had shifted. The restraints were gone. Her gear sat neatly on the table across from her, cleaned, repaired. That was new. The handler stood near the door, posture less rigid than before. "The asset made it through the pass," he said. Emily closed her eyes. A breath escaped her she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "He's gone," he added. "No signal, no trail." "Good." "There's fallout," he continued. "Questions, oversight. People who were comfortable not knowing are suddenly curious. Emily sat up slowly. And me? He hesitated. That's still being decided. She studied him, really looked, the lines around his eyes, the fatigue. He wasn't the villain she once imagined. He was something more dangerous. A believer. Why did you hesitate on the ridge? She asked. He stiffened. I didn't. You did, she said gently. You waited before giving the order. Silence stretched. Finally, he said, because I wanted to be sure. Of what? That you were still you. Emily smiled faintly. That's the problem, she said. I finally am. Days passed, or maybe weeks. She was transferred, screened, evaluated again. No charges filed, no commendations offered. Limbo. She spent long hours alone thinking about what came next, about whether there was a next. Hope surfaced cautiously, like light under a door. One morning, the handler returned with a thin folder. You're being released, he said, unofficially. Emily frowned. That's not a thing. It is when paperwork disappears, he replied. You'll be retired. She laughed this time openly. I was never officially employed. A corner of his mouth twitched. There are conditions, he said. You don't speak, you don't write, you don't correct the narrative. Emily stood. I never have, she said. He nodded. There's one more thing. He slid the folder across the table. Inside was a single photograph, grainy, satellite capture. The asset months later, alive, working in a remote clinic, ordinary, anonymous. Emily's vision blurred. You didn't have to show me this, she said. I know, the handler replied, but you earned it. She looked up. Did I change anything? He considered that. You reminded us, he said slowly, that silence isn't the same as obedience. They escorted her out at dawn. No ceremony, no record, just a gate opening onto a road she hadn't walked in years. Emily stepped into the cold air, free and uncertain. Broken, yes, but hopeful. For the first time, she didn't know who she was supposed to be. And somehow, that felt like the beginning. Sometimes redemption isn't loud. Sometimes it's simply being allowed to walk forward, unhidden, unafraid, carrying your scars without explanation. And sometimes that's enough. Why did freedom feel heavier than captivity? Emily stood at the edge of the road long after the gate slid shut behind her. No guards, no cameras she could see, no voice telling her where to go next, just a thin strip of asphalt cutting through frost-hardened earth, disappearing into trees that didn't care who she was or what she'd done. She had imagined this moment before, not often, but sometimes late at night when sleep refused to come. In those versions, freedom felt clean, immediate, like shedding a weight. This wasn't that. Her pack rested at her feet, familiar, too familiar. It carried habits more than supplies. She realized she was waiting for something, an instruction, a correction, a reminder that she didn't belong to herself. Nothing came. The silence was different now, not enforced, not strategic. Chosen. She started walking. Each step felt tentative, like learning a new language with muscles that only knew commands. The cold bit through her jacket, but she welcomed it. Sensation anchored her, reminded her she was still here. Alive, ordinary, unclaimed. The first town appeared hours later, small, forgettable, the kind of place people pass through without noticing. A diner with fogged windows, a gas station humming quietly, a few cars parked without urgency. Emily hesitated before entering the diner. That old instinct flared, assess exits, red faces, prepare for judgment. She caught herself. No one here knew her. That should have been comforting. Inside, warmth wrapped around her. Coffee, grease, voices layered with mundane complaints. A waitress glanced up, smiled without calculation. "Seat yourself," she said. Emily chose a booth near the wall out of habit, then consciously slid to the outer seat. An experiment. Exposure. A menu lay open before her, too many choices. She felt oddly overwhelmed. Missions had always been simple in comparison. Objectives, constraints, end states. This was unstructured. She ordered eggs she didn't really want and coffee she drank too fast. As she waited, she watched people. A couple arguing quietly. A man reading the paper, shaking his head at something small and distant. A woman laughing too loudly at a phone screen. Normal life. She felt like a visitor in a country she'd forgotten how to enter. The food arrived. She ate mechanically at first, then slowed, tasted it, let herself exist without scanning for threat. Her hands were steady. That surprised her. After the diner, she walked again, past storefronts, past nothing in particular. She didn't have a destination. That terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. At the edge of town, she found a motel, cheap, anonymous. She paid cash. The clerk didn't ask questions. Inside the room, she sat on the bed and stared at the wall. This was when it usually hit. The crash. The delayed cost of holding it together for too long. Her chest tightened. Breath caught. For a moment, she thought she might break apart right there, years of restraint collapsing into something messy and loud. Instead, tears came quietly. She didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. Ignored, anxious, broken. All the words she'd lived under finally had room to breathe. She cried for the girl who learned early that silence kept her safe. For the woman who proved herself endlessly to people who never truly saw her. For the lives she touched and left without goodbye. For the part of her that still flinched at laughter. When it passed, she felt hollow but lighter. That night, she slept without dreaming for the first time in years. Morning arrived softly, pale light through thin curtains, the world continuing without permission or pause. Emily packed slowly, deliberately. She left the rifle behind, locked in its case, arranging a drop she'd memorized years ago, not because she was told to, because she was done carrying it. She kept walking. Days blurred together. She crossed towns, took odd jobs stacking boxes, cleaning spaces no one noticed. People underestimated her constantly. She let them. There was peace in that. She learned to sit in parks without tracking movement, to stand in lines without mapping exits, to listen without preparing responses. One afternoon, she passed a gun store. Her steps slowed. The windows gleamed. Familiar silhouettes lined the walls. Laughter spilled out as someone told a story she didn't hear. Her pulse quickened. For a moment, she considered going inside, testing the world again, seeing if it still tried to define her before listening. Then she kept walking. Not because she was afraid. Because she didn't need to prove anything anymore. Weeks later, she settled in a place near the water, a town shaped by tides and patience. She rented a small room above a repair shop. The owner asked few questions, paid on time. That was enough. She volunteered at a community center, fixed things, lifted boxes, listened more than she spoke. One evening, a teenage girl sat beside her on the steps, shoulders hunched with familiar tension. "They don't take me seriously," the girl said suddenly. "Everyone thinks I'm weak." Emily considered her answer. "I used to think strength was something you showed," she said finally. "Turns out it's something you keep." The girl frowned, then nodded slowly. Emily watched the horizon that night, the water swallowing the sun inch by inch. She felt something settle inside her, not happiness exactly, but alignment. She thought of the handler, of the asset, of the mountains that still stood indifferent and vast. She hadn't dismantled the system. She hadn't exposed it. She hadn't changed the world in any dramatic way. But one person had walked free. And one woman had reclaimed her name, even if no one else knew it. Sometimes redemption doesn't arrive with forgiveness. Sometimes it arrives quietly, when you stop running from who you've become and start choosing who you'll be next. Emily breathed in the salt air. No rank, no call sign, no orders waiting in the dark. Just a life. And for the first time, she stepped fully into it. Because dignity doesn't announce itself. It doesn't argue. It doesn't beg to be believed. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.